This is Sunrise Sunset, the Jewish Family in Transition, and I'm Audrey Gordon. My guest today is Dr. Carol Kanter, and Dr. Kanter has written a book called And Baby Makes Three, Your Feelings and Needs as New Parents. Dr. Kanter is a psychotherapist. She's in private practice, and I think we should talk about what's in here. I've read it. I think it's great.
Thanks.
Everybody thinks that when you have a baby, it's rosy. It's wonderful. I mean, you have this new precious life. They are supposed to look like baby food ads, you know, babies and baby food ads. And what really happens to parents after they have a new baby?
Well, every parent has their own case of what really happens, of course, to them. But there are some generalizations that probably can be made. One is that it isn't always like you expect. Whatever you have anticipated, there are changes that occur from the scenario that you've set in your mind, probably not even knowing that the scenario is there. And those changes can be very upsetting. They can throw people off balance. It's a job that we haven't been prepared for. Lots of preparation, lots of job training goes into all of our other jobs, practically. And the one job that we haven't been really trained to do is be a parent.
Well, but if I were to say to you that people have been parents for millions, literally millions and millions of years, and we've produced geniuses. I mean, our civilization has advanced. We haven't exterminated ourselves yet from the face of the earth. And so isn't there something innate about parenting? Isn't there something that I can learn by looking at how other people do it, or have my mom and dad together, or my older sister or brother or whatever tell me what it's all about? Do I really need training?
Well, I think there are lots of sources of information. In fact, parents are a source of information. One's own experiences are also a source of information about how to be a parent. But I think there's a grand myth, in fact, a number of grand myths out there in our culture that you allude to when you say, shouldn't it be innate? There's a feeling afoot that parenting should be natural. There have been parents,
well,
as
childbirth
you know,
is natural. Shouldn't
well,
parenting be natural?
Childbirth is deemed natural now.
Right.
And of course, it's a natural process, but that doesn't mean it doesn't take work. It's also called labor in another generation.
Right.
So it's work. And parenting doesn't necessarily come automatically and easily. There are certainly things that one feels one should do, and one of the things that one feels often that one should do is be a terrific parent, in fact, almost a perfect parent. And if things go wrong, which inevitably they do in early parenthood, in fact, throughout parenthood, but we're focusing here on early parenthood, when things go wrong, then it's too easy for parents to feel that they've made a mistake and that they should have known better somehow, that all these things should have come easily to them and they should have done a fantastic, superhuman job automatically. There's a concept that the book promotes that's not my own really. It's by Dr. Winnicott, who was a pediatrician and child psychoanalyst. His concept is that of good enough mothering. And it's one that I think shatters a lot of myths. First of all, it implies that you don't have to be a perfect parent, that there's such a thing as good enough parenting.
By the way, you know, what keeps running through my head while you're saying this, and we'll get back to it, is that Jewish parents don't feel that way.
Don't feel?
Good enough.
Good enough.
Nothing is good enough.
Nobody feels good enough.
Right, but it's almost like nothing is just good enough. It has to be better than.
Well, It's a time and a job that people feel so invested in. It's so important to people to do good parenting. They wouldn't have had this baby, more than likely, if they didn't want to be a good parent at some level. They could choose otherwise. Even if they got pregnant, they could have chosen to not have this baby. So at some level, they are very invested in being good parents. All the people that I interviewed for purposes of writing about in my book had very different lifestyles and very different styles of parenting, but the one thing that they all shared was the wish to do a really good job with their baby. So it's a time of heightened feelings, of heightened wishes and anxieties about doing a good job. And anything that goes wrong then gets exaggerated, potentially anyway, in one's mind as,
What did I do?
I've done it wrong. And it feels almost irreparable, which very little is at this
You know,
stage.
it interests me when you said something going wrong. Things usually don't go wrong with babies. It is that they don't go the way people think they ought to go. Is there a difference? I mean, when a baby gets sick, or I remember that my eldest son, when he was born a long time ago, was colicky for the first 30 days. And it took some time before the physician figured out, the pediatrician figured out that he was being overfed because he was being breastfed. That he was being overfed rather than underfed. Everybody always assumes with breastfeeding that you're being underfed. And it took about 30 days, and it was horrible and it was miserable, but I don't remember thinking I had done anything wrong. I knew that there was something wrong. I just wasn't sure what was going on.
It's easy to feel that you're not providing the necessary mothering help, or mothering can be expanded to include fathers too in this period. Fathers as well as mothers, contrary to old myths, can do good enough mothering. So if the baby is uncomfortable, and particularly for an extended period of time, parents get very uncomfortable with that. And they feel inadequate in providing enough good mothering, or good enough mothering, to take care and ease the baby's discomfort. And then they begin to have worries about their own inadequacy as caretakers or as parents, which is very important to them.
Yeah.
And then, you know, it's a vicious cycle. Then you can get anxious about being anxious. You know, it just escalates.
Well, isn't there also the problem where the husband, who might not have taken the nurturing role quite as completely as the wife has, looking at her and say, well, listen, my mother didn't have any trouble raising 5 kids. How come you're having trouble with this? Or what's wrong? Aren't you a good mother? Is that something that happens?
Oh, I'm sure that that's something that happens. People have lots of myths to contend with. One is the myth of everything is easy and natural, and another more personal level myth is the myth that my mother or my mother-in-law did it just fine, what's the matter with me? Or another one is the personal expectations that one sets up about how the child should be or how parenting should go at the early stages. And those myths they're not cultural myths, but they're personal myths, can get in the way of seeing what this particular baby is really like.
What would be a typical myth of new parents in terms of what their expectations are about how it should go?
Well, you mentioned one, Audrey, and that is, you know, you're supposed to have the ivory soap type looking baby when the baby's born, and very few babies come out other than red and wrinkly rather than cute and smiley. And it's sometimes something that parents aren't prepared for. There are lots of small things that can be wrong in terms of health of babies. They can be colicky, or even earlier they can be jaundiced, or they can have vomiting, or whatever it is. Things that you wouldn't say are absolutely normal, but neither are they life-threatening. It's hard to put those kinds of things in perspective when you're very worried about how this new being is going to come out after all. I mean, you don't know for sure how healthy the baby's going to be, and there are lots of worries about that.
We have lots of feeding worries, I know, with babies that...
Yes, and that's an interesting point, because feeding is one of the most tangible ways that you can take care of an infant. You can't get it to talk, and you can't even often get it to smile early on, and responding is limited, after all, in a newborn. One of the things you can do is you see how they eat. You also see how they wet and soil and sleep. Those are all places where you can actually monitor in some specific way. But the feeding is where the parent can give to the baby. And that's what caretaking is supposed to be about, the kind of giving that feeding symbolizes.
And if a baby doesn't like what you're feeding it, then you feel rejected, personally rejected.
It's a danger.
Yeah.
You don't have to feel that way.
No. But many people do feel that way and get extreme.
Yeah.
Just as a sidelight, and I know that you don't discuss it in here, but I know that the rage, the frustration, the sleeplessness, and all of those things really lead you to some very harmful thoughts towards that baby. Does that ever really actualize, or can we say to new parents, that's normal to feel that way, you're not really going to do anything about it?
Both things are true, I think. One of the things that has come out loud and clear in every new parent couples group that I've run is that people do get frustrated, that things don't go smoothly. There are things that often aren't talked about between couples for fear that there's something wrong with them, and they don't want to bear that to the world. So people are left feeling kind of alone with those kind of frustrations.
Or if you say, I wanted to smash the kid,
right,
somebody looks at you, what kind of a monster are you?
Exactly. So the frustrations, though, can build up into the kind of anger that feels very destructive. And when they're directed against the baby, which, after all, they are, because it's the baby that's instigating these, it feels awful. I mean, you're supposed to love the baby. It's not the baby's fault that he's crying. And so then you worry about those kinds of things getting out of hand. With most of us, they don't get out of hand. With most of us, hopefully we build in outlets. We can talk about them at least to our spouse or partner. We can go take a walk. We can get some relief. We can swap babies with a neighbor or friend who has ability to
another
take
baby
over.
who's going to sleep.
Right. Well, I mean, they can take care of the baby while we go out and take a break, and then we can reciprocate. Hopefully there's enough relief that people can build into their own lives that they don't have to continually build up this level of frustration and anger. But if people are worried, really worried, about losing control and harming the baby, then they need to get some help with that. One of the things that they can do is there's an organization called Parents Anonymous, and they can get some help even over the phone to talk about these things without even giving a name if they're worried about it. But what it signifies is that these people aren't getting enough for themselves to be able to give appropriately to the baby. They need some relief themselves.
What are some of the problems that arise in a marriage after the birth of the first child? And this is specifically for people who have become parents for the first time.
More for them.
More for them than for people who have 2 and 3 and 4 children.
Yes, although my favorite chapter is on child development, and I think that it gives a very clear and important overview of what happens in infant development and the piece that's often missing, the way parents can fit into that. Because after all, most development just happens.
Right.
Without you're doing very much about it. But there are a few very key things that a parent needs to be able to plug in on. And that's true for any age child.
Yes. What I was thinking about was that very often when a man and a woman marry and they spend maybe a year, maybe two, sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter, but they're together, and you mentioned about how, hey, let's go away for the weekend, up and out, or let's go to dinner, or whatever. That they really are forming as a couple, but have no restrictions. They're free. And sometimes in a marriage, the reasons for which the people married have to do with, I have you, you're all mine now, especially for the woman. And along comes the baby in between.
Well, it certainly feels very much in between at first, most often, that there can be a kind of intrusion, at least in terms of time, because it's often one of the surprises of having a first baby, how much time this little creature can
That's supposed
take.
to sleep all day.
Right, didn't read that book.
Right.
It takes up an enormous amount of time and energy. And often what happens is that there's a lot less than there used to be for partners to have for each other. And they have to make some kind of acclimation to that. Now, it doesn't need to feel altogether like the baby has been a major intrusion into their life that has separated them. In fact, it's also something more that they can share. But they have to make time to do the sharing. And it's important that they not simply put their own relationship on hold while they cater altogether to the baby. They need some time to connect again.
There's also is it a myth? There's also the idea that the new mother bonds to this baby, that there's almost something instinctive going on, so that her attention, her body, are directed to the baby so that she will turn away from the husband at this point, in the early weeks following the birth. First of all, she's physically different.
Okay, well, a lot of this has to do...
Is that a myth?
Well, a lot of it has to do with, as so many psychological things do, one's perception of it. I mean, some women, and indeed some partners of women, think they look wonderful pregnant.
Oh, yes, I remember that.
Okay? And some people think, oh my God, how long is this going to go on till I can, have this body back in shape, whether it's mine or my spouse's. It need not be considered altogether a turning away. After all, the baby is really part of both of them. And if the father can share in the experience, it will feel less like they're being abandoned.
So that when mother feeds the baby, father should be there, or...
Well, maybe not.
When possible.
It's not altogether possible, but certainly the experience can be one that they share. And at first, the baby is much more time-consuming and energy-consuming. But if the father can even take care of the mother while the mother's taking care of the baby, or if the father can do some direct caretaking with the baby, I'm a strong advocate of, even if you're a nursing mother, allowing the father to have some experience of feeding the baby directly. I think that all kinds of things can be worked out. Expressing milk into a bottle so that the father can have the experience of feeding the baby, because it's a time when bonding occurs, feeding times. And I think the father can bond to the baby as well as the mother.
Well, isn't it a good idea when you breastfeed anyway to still have one bottle? Simply because if you do have to be away, then the baby's used to it. I mean, that would be a bottle perhaps that the father could give.
Sure.
That would be one way
Sure.
of doing it. Let's talk about another subject that has a lot of myths connected to it, and that's grandparents.
Uh-huh.
There are all different kinds of grandparents today. Some of them are traditional and some of them are not. And I know that when I had kids, that I thought how pleased my mother was going to be a grandma. Of course, I sprang that on her rather early. But nevertheless, I really expected her to do certain kinds of grandmotherly things, which now that she's much older and my children are grown, but my brother's children are younger, she does more naturally. But then she was busy and she was working, and it didn't fulfill my mythical expectations.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that it's easy to play out a scenario in one's mind of how one hopes things are going to go. And they don't always go that way. The couples that have been woven into the book have very different experiences with their own parents. And therefore, they are very different kinds of grandparents that are alluded to in the book.
But did they expect their parents to behave in the ways in which they did?
Some did and some didn't, I think. I think sometimes it works out just as you expect because you know you know your parent.
Right.
And sometimes it's, again, another surprise that one has to somehow dredge up energy to deal with.
Well, what about the whole issue of, and I remember this, I'm sure it still goes on, I know what to do for the baby, but what I know to do for the baby, and I'm as the grandparent speaking to the new mother, well, you do it this way, and no, mother, we do it differently now these days, or no, we don't have diapers that have pins, or all of the stuff that the last time the grandparent took care of a baby, it was very different. How do you deal with, first of all, the inadequacy on the part of the grandmother who really wants to help, or the grandfather who really wants to help, and the new mother who's kind of saying, I am, there's this transition that's going on. The daughter has become a mother instead of the grandmother picking up.
Very hard, like any transition, like.
Well, give some suggestions on how you do that.
Well, one of the things that I think new parents need to know is that all these people who are wanting to be so helpful, whether you want it or not, are really wanting to be involved with the baby. It's too easy for new parents who themselves feel a little shaky about their role and their adequacy in that role to feel criticized.
Yes.
And to feel like they're vulnerable and on the spot. So that any suggestion that comes at them from wherever, certainly from their parents, might potentially feel like, what, you don't think that I can handle this?
Right.
And so I think it would be useful if new parents could kind of translate the suggestions that are coming to them, not in terms of questioning their adequacy as parents, but in terms of a wish to be involved with babies. Everybody wants to be involved with a baby. If there's a baby in the room, people somehow are attracted to it. It has to do partly with the fact that they all know that they were babies once themselves.
All right, so I'm running as the new mother an internal dialogue that says, my mother does not mean to be criticizing me here. It feels like that, but I'm going to put that aside. How can I tell her, first of all, you don't have to boil the nipples or whatever. I mean, things have changed. I don't even know what they've changed to. But how can I tell her that what she is doing is wrong? Or that's not the way that I'm raising this baby?
Well, one
without
thing,
that sounding, coming the same way.
okay, one thing that I think could help is if a new mother would say, first of all, that their goals in raising their babies, whether her or her husband and this little baby, were really basically the same. That she really wants the best for this baby too. As she knows the mother wanted,
her mother does, yes.
the grandmother
Right.
wanted. And if the mother could then give the grandmother some idea of what would be helpful to her in helping her be a mother to this baby, whether it's, getting another kind of jumpsuit for the baby that would work better for her, or whatever it is, if there could be a concrete suggestion about what would really be helpful to me helping this baby, it might redirect
Yes.
some of the wishes to be involved in a way that might serve both of their needs. Worth a try.
Worth a try. Oh, well, I think communication often helps, and that if you have been raised with what is perceived as a critical parent, then you take everything that the parent says as critical, and you really do have to say, what is it that my parent really wants, and how happy is my parent really, and can I build into that? Let's just, in the last minute or so that we have, what should be done about educating new parents? What would you, in an ideal world, have? And we really just have a few seconds here.
Well, I think one of the things that should happen is that there should be more of a focus on the baby and parenting before pregnancies, or at least before delivery. It's very hard during a pregnancy because parents are so focused on labor and delivery, which is so scary and concrete and confined, that it provides a very easy focus for them. Not easy, but relatively easy compared to this vague business about being a parent. So anything that could be done preliminarily to prepare parents for what to expect in general
Okay.
would
All right.
help.
Thank you very much. My guest has been Dr. Carol Kanter. This is Audrey Gordon, Sunrise, Sunset. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we ran 5 seconds over, but it's going to be all right. I'll just use it as we can.